Okay, so I'm Don Henderson, and this is my final project for our mass media class, our online mass media class. Now, the organization that I chose to do my project on is ESPN, which is um, a sports organization that is intended to provide highlights, news, and information all revolving around sports around the world in several different sports, professional, mostly professional, but often as well high school and college. So here's ESPN. These are just several photos of some of the sports that are covered by ESPN. Like here we have LeBron James of the NBA, Tom Brady of the NFL, and not sure who this guy is, but someone in the MLB, obviously. Now, the intended audience for ESPN is originally, when it was founded, was only men. It was meant to be an organization for men to stay active and current on their sports. And as they later went on, as they evolved, if you will, as they became more culturally diverse, they intended to get more of a female demographic, and they also wanted to involve children in their viewing audience. This was seen when they started partnering up with Disney, and they even for a little time had ESPN for Kids, which was all um, like it was supposed to be kids' favorite athletes, kids interacting with athletes. It was real centered around the children's perspective. Okay. This is some of their logos over time. This was the original logo here. Then they moved to this one down here and ultimately ended with this one in the bottom right, was which they have stayed pretty same. They have the same like font, and the line that goes through the ESPN is obviously still here, but the color scheme and the background is what has evolved over time, if you will. But yeah, this one is the one that stands out. This one in the top left corner here is the one that stands out the most, which is obviously a little different from the other ones, but the rest of them all have this sort of same theme, if you will. Now, communication over time. ESPN communicates with their audience primarily through television, which is where they're most popular today. And when they originally became an organization, that is the only place that they were present was television. But then they evolved in radio, and now today they have podcasts, and they're all over social media, as I mentioned here. They're on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, where they've become a lot more interactive with the groups that follow their sports and follow their organization and look to be involved in the sports world, if you will. So they're obviously an interactive group, and they're innovative and all of those things. They try to stay current with technology and with how the world is changing around them. They don't try to stick to how they began as an organization, but sort of progress as the world progresses as well. Now, the culture effect that ESPN has is, in my opinion, quite large because sports is a huge part of the world, especially here in the U.S. Americans love their sports, and ESPN is probably the biggest provider of these sports. I feel like every night, every day, every whatever, if you turn on ESPN, you'll probably see some live sports being played. They have several different channels. There's like ESPN1, ESPN2, ESPNU, ESPN News, ESPN Classics. They have you at any point of the day, you can turn on some ESPN channel and be able to see some sport that I'm sure you'll find interesting. And that's huge. Like I mentioned before, our culture loves sports, and so they found a way to bring sports to the people, and they're the biggest provider of that. And so if you take ESPN out of our culture, that would be a huge hit to our society. We, as especially in the men demographic, rely on ESPN to keep us updated with sports. If you miss a game, or if you perhaps didn't have access to the game as you may have hoped you would, you can always just depend on either using social media to check ESPN or catching ESPN highlights the next day and expecting them to be able to tell you what happened in that game. Now, for a crisis situation, in the early 2000s, ESPN was being accused of having validity issues, which means that they were releasing false news, that they were accused of releasing false news. Now, there was never proof that these allegations were true, but this was something that they had to deal with, because if you're going to be a company that is based on delivering news, information, and highlights, if these things that you're providing are not true, then that can become a problem for your audience and your organization as a whole. In order to avoid this problem going forward, they decided to start like citing where they're getting this from, like not specifically, like a lot of the analysts and journalists and commentators for ESPN will say, my sources have told me this, but they always credit the information to a specific person in their organization, so that if it comes out to not be true, or if it is proved to be a false news article or something like that, you can take it directly to the person, and the ESPN can also in return take it directly to that person and sort of not only fault them, but sort of get to the bottom of why it happened and where it actually came from, versus it just looking bad for the entire ESPN. And this sort of communicated to them that this is their way of communicating to the world that, yeah, our organization may not always get to the bottom of what's happening, but sort of you can't fault the whole organization for that. Um, you sort of have to figure out who originated the problem and then develop from there. You don't have to necessarily hold it against ESPN as an entire group, which I found that to be pretty unique, because if I work for ESPN and I make a mistake, that should not be held against the entire organization. That should sort of be my problem. I should figure out where I went wrong, and we can and move from there. But in conclusion, my final thoughts on ESPN is they've been around for a really long time, and in my opinion, they provide great information and great things to our culture, which are quite valuable in the long run. And this alone allows them to be relevant to our society. And so I guess the basics of what I'm trying to say is I support ESPN as a group, and I feel like the impact and the amount of significance that they bring allows for them to continue to flourish. So with that being said, this is ESPN and I am Don Henderson. Thank you.